This is a demonstration of Wirecast. 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 This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
A domain. And Microsoft in version 4 of PowerShell introduced desired state configuration. How many of you are familiar with that? So that, I think Eric talked about that at one point, or maybe it was Steve last year that talked about, Steve Mar-Elia that talked about that. But, the DSC is sort of taking a different approach to configuration management. People have asked me a lot, so what is the difference between DSC and group policy? When should I use one or the other? And today, anyway, it's really not an either or. DSC is really optimized for that kind of continuous integration, continuous deployment scenario where you're pushing out configuration to Windows servers and also now supporting Linux in kind of rapid prototyping or rapid iteration release model. And you need to be able to blow out a known good configuration on your Windows servers in a very rapid and automated fashion. And that's really where DSC is optimized. But just last week, one of the PowerShell MVPs wrote a DSC resource. So DSC is kind of infinitely extensible, wrote a DSC resource to be able to modify admin template policy on the local GPO. So you can now create a DSC document that is essentially just writing registry values into the local GPO. So the lines are blurring between the two, and I'm going to show you something towards the end of this presentation that's going to blur them even more, perhaps in an aberrant way, but I'm going to show you nonetheless. So what am I going to talk about? Tools of the trade, what's available for managing group policy with PowerShell today. How many of you have done group policy management using PowerShell? 1.5. So I'm going to show you what's available today. I'm going to kind of give some examples of what I call the full life cycle. It's not really the full life cycle without third-party products, and I am going to. I'm not here to pitch product. I'm here to talk about group policy and PowerShell. But I've personally, in my business, done a lot with PowerShell and group policy, so I might show some examples along the way of that. And then reporting on GP from PowerShell, and finally troubleshooting. And along the way, if there's questions, feel free to ask. This is really kind of an informal thing, the smallish group. Look forward to questions. I'll have to figure out, Eric, how I can answer questions online. I'm sure we'll figure that out. But in any case, let me get into it. So, with the release of Windows 7, Microsoft provided the first official PowerShell interface for group policy. I say official because I actually built one back in 2007 for XP in 2003. It was my first attempt at building at that time it was a PowerShell snap-in that did most of what the Microsoft PowerShell module eventually did, and actually a few other things that I'll show you. That's a free utility that's still out there, and I still get a fair bit of downloads for it, so people are still kind of interested in using it. In Windows 8, Microsoft added one new commandlet, which was the invoke GP update. So this is essentially remote GP refresh from PowerShell. So you have the ability now to trigger a GP update force using PowerShell against a remote system, which is a nice thing. The Microsoft module primarily covers the tasks that you would do in GPMC. So when I talk about it as kind of it's sort of doing the meta tasks that GPMC allows you to do. Creating GPOs, deleting GPOs, linking GPOs, permissioning GPOs, and a very small smidgen of settings management, very small, in that they provided two sets of commandlets for getting and setting registry policy and registry GP preferences in the PowerShell commandlet. And I'll show you an example of setting registry policy coming up here. So essentially, very geared towards reporting, creation, linking, those meta operations that GPMC provides. And this is really just a screenshot of all the commandlets in the module, get command, dash module, group policy, no big deal. Some other options. So I mentioned that I have this GPMC commandlet. If you go out to the SDM software site, you can still download those. I'll show you some of the things that you can do in those that aren't in the Microsoft module, like getting and linking WMI filters, getting and setting security on containers, meaning OUs, like doing things like RSOP delegation and linking delegation, and then getting links by GPO or by SOM, SOM meaning OU domain site. And then I'm going to just briefly show you, we have, in the commercial products that I have, there's some PowerShell interfaces in them that are kind of interesting. Again, I don't want to make this about that, but just want to talk about the capabilities that are out there for managing group policy. I'll also mention that the Microsoft Script Center has a lot of good group policy with PowerShell examples out there. So if you go out to the Script Center and do a search on group policy, you'll find a lot of interesting examples. In fact, there was one out there. One of the key, I don't know if it's a common scenario, but it's certainly a scenario that comes up. One of the key things lacking in both my module and the Microsoft module is that you can't create a WMI filter from PowerShell. And somebody from Microsoft went out and wrote a script to do that, and I believe it's up on the Script Center. So that's a good resource. If you're not already hanging out there, it's a good resource for group policy related stuff as well. So automating the life cycle, what's possible? It's possible to automate almost every phase of group policy management today. And when I talk about the life cycle, I mean things like creating GPOs, deleting GPOs, modifying some settings. Again, there's limited support for that in the box module. Permissioning the GPO, so security filtering, who can process the GPO. Linking to a container, so these are just the things you do when you're going to roll out a new GPO. You create the GPO, you put the settings in it, you permission it, maybe you do, maybe you don't, and then you link it. And reporting on it, so reporting on settings in the GPO. So just like you would go into GPMC and do a GPMC settings report and see all the settings, you can do that from PowerShell. And you can also perform RSOP, so you can do a GP result against a remote system using the PowerShell commandlet. So I'm going to take you through an example of doing this in essentially a one-liner. It's a little bit dramatic, but it kind of shows off the capabilities of what you can do with the Microsoft module. So we're going to create a new GPO. There's also a commandlet for removing GPOs. We're going to set GP registry value, which is an admin template setting. Now I'll explain how that works in a minute. It's not like what you see in GP Editor where you go in under admin templates, system, blah, 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 path. It's putting the registry values that underlie that admin template into the policy, but it is supported that way. Setting the permissions on a GPO, so modify the security group, filtering or delegation, and then linking the GPO to a container. So that's my one-liner. And what that's doing is creating a GPO called IE no health policy, setting a restrict help admin template setting, setting the permissions on the GPO. Let me see if I can use my pointer. Setting the permissions right here. Sorry for you guys down there, you're not seeing my pointer, but I'm going to go through this on the console, so you'll see it in a second. First, setting the permissions on, so I'm setting GP permissions. I'm removing authenticated users because I only want this to target to the marketing users group down here. So I'm removing with authenticated users first with set GP permissions, and then I'm adding marketing users with the GPO apply permission, and then I'm linking the GPO to the marketing OU. So that's my one-liner, and I'm going to go ahead and drop out here and show you what that looks like.
What's the last piece?
The new GP link?
No, the dash order one.
Dash order one. So as you probably know, on any given container, you can have multiple GPOs linked to it. This tells it to put it at the top of the list, so it has the highest priority. So
if you keep executing this with random other stuff, the last executed will
always go to the top, so it'll just keep pushing down the last one that you did. Right. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring up my, so what I'm going to do here, this mouse thing is going to kill me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up GPMC so you can see my little landscape here. I've got Active Directory running on an Azure VM. And let me just make sure I don't have any GPO called IE no help policy. Let me go ahead and delete that. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this command, which is basically that command you just saw on the screen. I modified it for my domain that I've got here. And sorry, let me get back here. I'm going to make my command window a little bit bigger. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And so now when I run this, what it's done is it's created my GPO. And this is actually returning the link that it created, the very last thing that it did. If I go back up into GPMC and do a refresh, you'll see here I now have IE no help. It's permissioned for the marketing users group. It's linked to the marketing OU. And if I go in under the settings report, you'll see here under Windows Components, prevent access to the Internet Explorer help is enabled. Let me just go back and look at this. So what did I do here? Well, I've got this registry, set GP registry value, and I'm setting this key here, HKey local machine policies, Microsoft Internet Explorer restrictions. I'm setting it with a value name of no help menu, type of D word, and a value of 1. So where did I get that from? Well, I had to go into the ADMX file for IE and search that out. So the commandlet doesn't do the parsing for me. The commandlet is expecting a registry path. So this is work that you have to do if you want to use this commandlet to modify admin template settings. The reason it shows up all pretty in GPMC is because when GPMC goes to report on the GPO, what it's reporting on is what's in the registry.pol, the settings file that is in the GPO, and it matches it against, it parses the ADMX file and matches it against which policy corresponds to that registry key and that value, and then it displays it in this kind of friendly way here in the UI. We don't get any of that benefit when we're using the PowerShell commandlet, so we have to know what the underlying registry entry is. So, for example, I'm gonna kind of get into the weeds here for just a second because I think it's useful. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab this path. Actually, I'm going to grab this value because I think it's going to be easier to search on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, kind of show the mechanics of this. If I go in under C, Windows, Policy Definitions, I happen to know that Internet Explorer stores its settings in a file called inetres.admx, so I'm going to go ahead and open that with Notepad. And then I'm going to search for no help menu. And there it is. So there's the policy that I just used, and you'll see here it's got the same key name in there as I had in my PowerShell command. So essentially, I've used the ADMX file to figure out what the setting is, and then I've reverse engineered it into the commandlet. Now, why is this useful? Why would you go to this work? Well, there's certain scenarios where automating the creation and modification of a GPO might be useful. Let's say you could be a managed service provider, or you might have multiple domains or multiple environments where you want to roll out the same set of settings to different user populations. You could literally script the creation and linking of these GPOs, just changing names like the OU that it's linked to or the domain that it's linked to, and do, at least from a registry settings perspective, a lot of work in PowerShell that would normally take, clicking for days or hours at least in the UI, and then you're not even guaranteed that you did everything right. So this comes in handy if you need to automate changes to group policy in a reliable way, in a repeatable way across different environments. Okay. Any questions on that? So what we did is we essentially created this one-liner that did several different tasks at once that would normally take me, I don't know, 10 minutes to walk through in the UI. I've basically done it after I created the one-liner. It took 5 seconds to run.
Yeah, but how long did it take you to find that setting?
How long did it take to find the setting? Good question. That is the question. But now remember, once I've found the settings that I'm interested in, if the scenario comes up, and this is why I call this the unholy alliance. There are not a ton of scenarios in group policy land unless you're an aggressive group policy user or a very large environment. We have a customer that has 10,000 GPOs.
Wow.
If you're in that kind of environment, then doing this, spending the little bit of time up front to find the setting, and you actually get good at finding settings in ADMX files when you know what to look for. But spending that time to find the setting, maybe it takes a minute to do that. But once you've done it, you can then blow it out across 20, 50, 100 GPOs. And that would have taken me, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and maybe I would have fat-fingered a couple of them along the way. So I think that's where the power can come in. It's not always, in this particular scenario, I don't want to emphasize the settings part of this so much as I want to emphasize all the other things you can do here. You can link and unlink GPOs. So if you wanted to build, for example, a change control process around group policy changes, you could automate making changes to your GPOs, at least the part where you make them live. You could change permissions on a GPO so it no longer applies. You make the change in the UI and then you change the permissions back. Or you unlink the GPO, you make the changes, you put the permission, or you put the link back. So those are the kinds of scenarios that are probably going to be more common than the one I just mentioned. But it's kind of nice to be able to do it.
When you modify the ADMX file, when you modify the policy, does the ADMX file actually get modified, or is it just a point of reference?
Right, so the question is, when I modified the policy, does the ADMX file get modified? The answer to that is the ADMX file never gets modified. So the ADMX file is only used in a couple different scenarios. It's only used when you're in GP Editor to show you the names of the policies and when you're doing reporting. So the ADMX file doesn't have any role. I actually just wrote a blog post about this. Let me see, I think I can find it.
You know what the root of what I'm asking you basically is, if I have a policy out in the GUI and I want to bring it into PowerShell, where do I grab the settings from instead of going the encrypting way?
Right.
And then my second question is, can you do all this with a custom ADMX file?
Right, so the question, so understanding the role of ADMX. So the ADMX file's sole role is to make your life as a GUI group policy editor and reporter easier. What the group policy object itself cares about, the way it stores settings, is in a Unicode encoded file in sysvol called registry.pol. And what it stores in there is key name, value type, value name, data. That's it. So it's a list of all of those things. When you click enabled on an admin template setting, it's writing those registry paths into registry.pol. Nothing, no involvement whatsoever from the ADMX file, except that the ADMX file tells the editor what the underlying path is and the value should be. So its role in the universe is fairly limited. In terms of custom ADMXs, can I use this for custom ADMXs? Because of that description I just gave you, you can probably imagine yes, absolutely, because a custom ADMX is just specifying another set of registry values. So absolutely you can do that. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is, let's say you create a custom ADMX and it's on one machine and you're editing it on one machine. Because you can have, in group policy land, you can have ADMX files stored locally like I just showed, or you can have them up in the central store. But let's say you don't have a central store and you have your custom ADMX on one machine. Well, I can write the value underlying that ADMX using PowerShell, and I can see it on my machine in GPMC when I do a settings report. But if I go to another machine where that GPMC, or where that ADMX isn't located, it'll show up under extra registry settings under admin templates in the reporting UI. And in GP Editor, you won't see it at all. You won't even know it's there. So the only way you'll know it's there is through that report. Yeah. So it's a little bit, it's confusing, and I get this question, that's why I wrote this blog post. I get this question all the time, what is the role of ADMX? Some people think that they're critical to the processing of settings. They have absolutely zero role in terms of processing. They're really server side they're a GUI side aid for you, and they have no role in how group policy stores and processes settings. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so some other things that we can do. Let me just go back to my presentation just quickly. I can get my mouse back to where I need to be. I feel like I'm on a treadmill. Okay, so what are some other things we can do? Add a comment to a GPO using PowerShell. Disable one of the sides of the GPO, so user side, computer side, disable. Get links on GPOs, and I mentioned my commandlets here. Let me just kind of show you a little bit of this.
Demonstration of Wirecast.
So go back to my UI here, to my ISE. Oops. So pardon me for having some of these copied and pasted in. If I was more organized, I would probably have a nice script running to do this. So if I wanted to, for example, add a description to this GPO, all I'm doing here is I'm using the get GPO commandlet, and I'm feeding it the name of the GPO that I just created in my one-liner. I put it around parentheses so that I can refer to its description property, and then I just set it equal to this text. And if I run that, and if I come back into GPMC, and I go over to details, there's my comment. So I'm able to, basically easily put a comment on the GPO. Somebody asked me the other day, how can you append comments? And if I recall correctly, it's as simple as this.
Of Wirecast.
And so now what I do is I come in here and hit F5, and you'll see here I've got it in twice. So I'm able to easily append comments. If I was really clever, I could probably append a carriage return in there. So the advantage of that is if you know how comments works, you know that you have to go into GP Editor, and you have to right-click on the top node of GP Editor and hit Properties, and then hit Comments to get a comment in. And this just makes it so much easier.
This is a demonstration of
And typically comments, if you're using comments for like change control purposes or stuff like that, it's nice to be able to automate that. So what was the other thing that I talked about? Well, I can disable the sides of a GPO. So this is a little bit of a variation on the last one. There's a property on the GPO called GPO status, and I'm passing in this enumeration called user settings disabled. There's another one that's computer settings disabled. If I go ahead and hit enter here, there's probably a more elegant way to do that, but that's the way I've found to do it, and you'll see here that just switched to user settings disabled. So it's easy for me to go in and change the side of a GPO. One thing I didn't show, which I should probably show, is if I just do get GPO on no help policy, like this, you'll see it returns a bunch of properties on the GPO. So I'm able to discover basics about a GPO pretty easily. Version information, the last time it was modified, if there's any WMI filter linked to it, the status of it, etc. So I'm able to really easily get to that data using get GPO. It's a handy commandlet for a lot of things. I can do get GPO all. Oops, sorry. I was getting confused with other syntax. And it returns all the GPOs in my domain. So really easy.
Query where a GPO is linked.
Can I query where a GPO is linked? A great segue. Let me get to this next question and then I'll answer that. Yes?
Demonstration
So,
of Wirecast.
I saw that dot description, you set the value, you don't set the value, it shows the value.
Yeah.
That's not a universal behavior of PowerShell. So is there a way to find out which settings you can update or which you cannot?
Yeah, so you're right. Not all properties are read-write. Some are read-only. Generally speaking, if, for example, I do this, Probably prove myself wrong, but you'll see here that description has both a get and set property on it. So that tells me I can do something with it. Whereas creation time, not so much. So that's where I usually go. It doesn't always work that way because depending on how the commandlet was implemented, I've found inconsistencies in that being true. There's probably a more clever PowerShell way to figure that out for sure. I'm not as that clever of a PowerShell guy. I'm more clever of a group policy guy. So my PowerShell friends online or in the room might be able to say, oh, you could just do this, that, and the other thing. But that's how I do it. Okay, any other questions? So to your, question.
One more question. So if you're not an owner or not the creator of this GPO, you won't be able to modify it. Is there a way to list who's the owner, who's the creator, so that way you can request for permissions or you could find out who created it?
You can. That the owner is listed here. Where am I?
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Let me get back to. Yeah. So this isn't very useful because what it does when it applies the owner, it applies the group the owner is in, rather than the actual owner. What you can do is, let's see, get GP permission. This should get me, I think this is the right one. Get GP permission, name, i.e. no help policy. Right. I think what I want is actually get GP permissions and i.e. no help policy. No. Target type or target name. Yeah, I think what this is looking for is the group, target type group, target type or target name. So it's asking me for a user group. So for example, if I give it authenticated users, does not have a security principal name. Okay, thank you very much. Let's try domain admins. Okay, and then it tells me that domain admins has this permission, GPO edit, delete, modify security, which happens to correspond, if I go up to this GPO, go over to delegation, to edit settings, delete, modify security. So it's not exactly giving you what you asked for, but it is, you can interrogate the GPO and find out what permissions are on the GPO. So let me go back to my screen. You had asked about getting links. The one downside to the Microsoft module, if there is any, is that it does not provide a get operation on GPO links. However, my module does. So this commandlet here, get SDM GP link, allows me to either search by GPO, and this tells me that the client's OU, let's see, this GPO is linked to the client's OU, and this is the DN, or the apps and the app server's OU, and this is the path. So this is an alternate way of getting that information. I can also, using this commandlet, ask it to give me all the links on a scope. So OU equals marketing, DC equals SDM lab, DC equals net, and it will show me all of the GPOs linked at that container. So there's two ways to run this to get the information. If I do a get command on the module group policy, which is the Microsoft module, you'll see that you can remove a GP link and you can create a new GP link, but there is no get GP link.
Is there, when you did the get policies, does it doesn't have the links anywhere in the properties?
Does get GPO have the links in the properties?
Yes.
I don't believe it does because that's not actually stored with the GPO. That's calculated when you do a report. So there is an indirect way to get it in a report, and I'll talk about reporting in a little bit.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
But not using this commandlet. So you first have to do a GPMC settings report essentially to get that information. So for example, let me just do help policy, and I'm just going to do a get member just to make sure, but I don't believe there is. It's nice to do get member every once in a while because it shows you some things that you might not know,
You got
like,
half there.
yeah, I think
This is a
I'm off my
demonstration
screen.
of Wirecast.
come back. Sorry. Let's see. Oh, I hate when that happens. There I am. Okay. I can say get GPO. Let me do this. Let me say GPO equals get GPO, i.e. no help policy. Okay. And then I can say $GPO is ACL consistent. And this will actually interrogate the GPO and find out if the access control list is consistent across all the domain controllers that that GPO lives in. So it's kind of a nice little, test that you can run to just make sure the GPO's access, the GPO is in sync from a permission perspective. And if it's not, there's a make ACL consistent method right here. Do you remember, you've probably seen this message in GPO when you click on a GPO and it pops up and it says, the permissions between AD and sysvol are inconsistent. Make them consistent. And that's what this is doing. Okay, so one quick thing I wanted to show you is one of the things that we've done, meaning my little company, is we have been able to write a PowerShell SDK into group policy. So what you see here is a little script that sets Windows Update options in admin templates. And what you're going to notice that's different from this, from the Microsoft one, is we are parsing the ADMX. So you enter in the path to computer configuration, admin templates, Windows components, Windows Update, configure automatic updates. You give it some syntax, and if I go ahead and run this, and the last line basically commits it to the GPO. After that runs, then if I come up here to the GPAE demo, go in under settings, administrative templates, then all of those options that I specified in the script are now set. So it's a little bit more flexible in terms of doing this. I wanted to point this out because this has been done. We actually built this back in 2006, and then we added GP preferences support in 2000, whenever that came out. And in fact, this is kind of a neat one that I like to run. So this is a demo of doing pushing a bunch of GP preferences drive mappings into a GPO. So if you use GP preferences, we have customers that we deal with have like 1,000 printer mappings using GP preferences, or 1,000 drive mappings, or whatever the craziness that they come up with. What you can do is I can basically write a little CSV file that has the share path, the drive letter, and the user group that I want to target to the drive mapping. And using PowerShell and the automation engine, what I could do is then write a script that iterates through that CSV file, creates the drive mapping, creates the security group item level targeting, and then I paste that in here and run that. Oh, I forgot one closing bracket here, I think. Yep, that's not good. So let me try it one more time.
When you highlight something in the ISE, there's a button in the toolbar that says Run Selection.
Yes, I know. I'm going to try that.
To copy and paste.
Thank you. That's a really good feature, and I forgot all about it. Okay, so that just ran. So if I go back into GPMC and do an update, let me see, what did I do? I picked the right GPO. Oh, I forgot the first part of it. That would help to get a reference to the GPO in the first place. Okay, try that again. Okay, now if I come up to GPMC and do a refresh, you'll see I've got a bunch of drive mappings that point to a UNC path, and they have security group filtering enabled on each of them based on that CSV file that I passed in. So this to me is kind of the ultimate example of automating GP changes, is that at least it's sexy in that, you know, we're doing a lot of work here that would normally take quite a few mouse clicks and be very error prone, and we're doing it in a script that's being driven by a CSV file that's fairly simple to create in a matter of, you know, I don't know, 10 seconds or whatever. So I think this is where the power of automation in group policy can be really compelling if you're in environments where you need to do a fair bit of changing. We had one telecom customer that needed to, they were using restricted groups policy very extensively across their domain, and they needed to change group references. They had group names or groups that went away, and they needed to remove those from the restricted groups policy across, like, I don't know, several thousand GPOs, and reapply a new group. And so they used this mechanism to do that because it would have been just painful to do it manually and probably error prone as well. So, I mean, this is kind of the power of PowerShell. You don't normally think about it in terms of group policy, but if you're in that kind of an environment where you're using group policy pretty heavily, it can really come in handy. Okay, let me get back to my presentation. Any questions on any of that? Okay, cool. So, I'm probably beyond these slides at this point. A little bit more on registry policy. So I mentioned, or I used GP registry value, get, set, or remove are in there. GP pref registry value lets you get, set, and remove GP preferences registry. So you know that under GP preferences, there's a registry area where you can make free-form registry entries in policy. This is writing to that section. So this commandlet that Microsoft provides writes to that section. It doesn't support item level targeting, and you do, again, you do need to know for the one that I talked about earlier, it doesn't parse ADMX, so you do need to know where you're writing to. But both of these commandlets can be useful in a pinch to just get a setting into a GPO.
Demonstration of Wirecast.
And again, it doesn't support item level targeting. And I talked about that. So let me go on to reporting. So there's a commandlet that comes with the Microsoft module that does basically the same as, let me get down to my console again. Oh, I see.
Demonstration of Wirecast.
Basically the same as if I were to run one of these reports right here. So trapped inside my monitor. Sorry for. There we go. So in this report, if I right click on it and say save report, it gives me the option of saving this to either HTML or XML. I can essentially do the same thing with PowerShell using get GPO report, which is in the Microsoft module,
Demonstration of Wirecast.
because it decides that it's done doing that. So there we go. So I can save it off as HTML or XML. Now, you know, from a PowerShell perspective, what we really want to be able to do is we want to be able to generate a report and then do something with it in PowerShell, some automation fun, to make it meaningful or useful. So what I've got here, this script that I wrote for a customer essentially takes the XML output of a GPO settings report, iterates through it looking for minimum password length policy. So if I come up to my laser pointer here, pardon me for just a second online. So it's basically using the XML type accelerator to take the report output in XML and turn it into a collection of objects. And then basically I'm able to iterate through that report and find the setting that I'm interested in. So I was very interested in minimum password length here, and write out the GPO that has that setting. So this is, write host is bad, I know, but this particular script served my purpose in terms of being able to show where this setting was set. So let me just drop out of this for a second and I'll show you a little bit about how that script works. Okay, so if I come down here,
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
in this case, what I'm doing is I'm getting all of the GPOs in the domain, storing them in this variable called all GPOs, and then I'm iterating through them and getting the current GPO's name, generating a report on it. This here, let me do something here. Let me just go ahead and I'm just going to do an example of what this looks like. So I'm going to use the XML type accelerator, $settings
Demonstration of
equals
Wirecast.
get GPO report, name, i.e., let's see, this is, let's call it default domain policy. That's a little bit more meaningful. And type XML. So now, if I get the contents of $settings, it's an XML document with a property called GPO. Oops, sorry. And you'll see that up here, I refer to that. And then there's a property underneath it called computer and a property underneath that called extension data. So if I go ahead and do a $settings GPO, what you'll see here is all the properties underneath that. And to your question earlier about links, I can now that I've done that, I can type links to, which is a property on this GPO, and apparently there's no links. Oh, links to. And it shows me the link for this GPO. So this is a way I can get it from the Microsoft module. I had to first generate a report, but once I did that, this data, of course, is available in the report, and so I can get access to it. So if I come back a step and go under computer, what that's telling me is these are the settings, or this is the area where the settings for the computer are stored in this GPO. And you'll see here under extension data, I have a number of different policy areas that are defined in this GPO. It's telling me that security, public key, and registry policy are defined in this GPO. So I can go in here and get more information about that. And if you notice up here, while I'm iterating through the settings in the GPO, I'm looking for security, and then I'm looking for account, and then I'm iterating through account policy to find the property called minimum password length. And if I do this, if I run this report, let me just go ahead and run this script.
Of Wirecast.
You'll see here that what I echoed out is the copy of default domain policy has a minimum password length of 8, and default policy has a minimum password length of 7. So essentially what I've done is just output what I was looking for across all of the GPOs in my domain. If there had been 1,000 GPOs and I didn't know where this particular policy area was implemented, I could have found it relatively easily if I knew the path in the XML. So my point in showing this is it is possible to traverse the reports using XML more easily than if you were doing it via HTML. And you can use that information to get settings data, links, metadata on the GPO. Anything that you see pretty much in this GUI report can be had using the get GPO report and an XML type accelerator. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. Let's see. Okay. I will not spend a lot of time on this. We've got some settings reporting that we can do. We can do comparison of GPO settings and exporting of GPO settings. This is sort of analogous to what I just showed you with Get GPO Report, except it's a little bit more straightforward. GP result set a policy. So there's a commandlet that lets you do RSOP or GP results using PowerShell. And it can grab that RSOP data from either a local or remote system. It's just like GP result, except again, you're getting more structured objects rather than a bunch of text using PowerShell. So for example, just drop out of here. Okay, if I come back in here. Okay, so this one's a little bit different than the settings report. For whatever reason, the way this commandlet get GP result and set a policy was written, it doesn't allow me to output the XML to a stream and therefore redirect it to a variable like I did with the settings report. I have to first output it to a file, which is what I'm doing here. And then I can grab that file and put it into XML, and then I can essentially iterate on it. And in fact, I don't even need this raw parameter here, so that can go away. But let me go ahead and do this. So what I'm doing is I have a computer, a remote computer called DSC target. I'm telling it to use an XML output type to this path. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. I keep forgetting to use run selection. Let's try that again. And with RSOP, what it's doing is it's going out to that remote computer over WMI and getting data about what happened during the last policy processing cycle. So it's actually touching that remote computer. It returns this information to just tell me that it did it. It's telling me that I'm logged onto that remote computer. So it's gotten logging user data for me for my group policy settings on that remote computer. Now, if I were to go in, we just go to the folder where that RSOP file is. You'll see here that it's just a bunch of XML that is returning the information about what policies were processed and what settings were processed. So just like with the settings report, because I've stored it to this variable called DSC target results, if I go ahead and type that out and go to RSOP property, you'll see here now I've got some interesting information. If I go into computer results, then it shows me some more information about where my machine exists in the OU structure, the site that I'm in. Searched SOM means those are the OUs and domains and containers that I searched. The security groups that the computer was a member of. So if I, let's see if I can do this, whether a slow link was detected, extension status, the GPOs that were processed, and the extension names that I generated. It also shows me event details. So let me just go into that for just a second because I think that's kind of interesting. I actually haven't gone into that one before, so I want to see what it returns for me. Let's see, target results, RSOP, computer results, event details, and single pass event details. Let me see what that. So, so what it's doing is it's actually showing me the XML of the events that were triggered by the last GP processing cycle on this machine. And why is that interesting? Well, let me go into the GUI for a second and I can show you kind of what this correlates to. So if I were to run group policy results, and I don't think this one's valid, so I'm going to go ahead and run the one that I just ran. So this is what I did using PowerShell just now. So I'm going to run it against DC target. And I'm going to tell it to ignore my user and just run against the
Demonstration of
computer.
Wirecast.
If I come here under policy events, what it shows me is the remote event log on that computer with the policy events related to group policy. So what the PowerShell commandlet is doing is it's giving me the raw XML of the events that I just saw on that last screen. And why this is interesting is because now I can take this data in PowerShell, parse it, and get interesting information on it, like
Of Wirecast.
the next policy processing time for the computer will be attempted in 101 minutes. This is an event that gets thrown whenever GP processing occurs. So this is kind of useful information to get at. And the point here is that this report that I generated is imminently parsable. If I go under Computer Results GPO, I can see all of the group policy objects that were processed by the computer and information about them, whether the link was enabled, whether a filter was allowed, whether access was denied, the security filter, all of that information that I normally see, for example, here under Details, Applied GPOs and Denied GPOs, I'm seeing that in this list over here. So I can pretty much get to all of this data and find out what's going on from PowerShell. Now, the things that I can't get to in PowerShell, if you're in a Windows 8 or a 2012 R2 environment, Microsoft added this summary screen that shows information about errors that it detected in processing. Those aren't going to show up in PowerShell. It also added, let's see, it's not where I'm looking for. The status screen is what I'm looking for, right? So if I select a GPO, let's do it this way. Select a domain, go to status. This is not exposed in PowerShell. This ability to check and see if all GPOs are being replicated correctly across all domain controllers, that's not exposed in PowerShell in any of the Microsoft commandlets. But by and large, the RSOP stuff, the GP setting stuff is all there. Any questions on the RSOP stuff? I kind of went through that a little bit fast.
Is this only in a 2012 domain?
The replication status? Yes, it is. 2012 or Windows 8 if you're running GPMC on Windows 8.
So no matter what version the domain is?
Yes.
Ah, all right.
Yeah, yes, it doesn't require a particular DC functional level, domain functional level. It's a function of the GPMC client. So if you're running GPMC on Windows 8, 8.1, 2012 R2, it's there. Yeah.
All these commandlets that you're showing us is PowerShell 4?
Sorry?
Is all the commandlets that you're showing us is this PowerShell version 4?
This is all PowerShell v4, but it should work in v3 actually.
Okay.
So the group policy module, the only exception to that would be, I think, the invoke GP update commandlet that I mentioned that was added in Windows 8. I think that's strictly a v4 artifact. And I didn't show that, but since that's something that people do all the time, if you're interested, so get help invoke GP update. Yeah, update. You can see a little bit about how this works. I can go ahead and select a computer, select a random delay, and then select one of the switches that I'm normally using in GP update, and it will go ahead and trigger that. What it actually does is the commandlet creates a scheduled task on the remote computer for if you don't specify a random delay, I think it's for like a 10-minute delay. So 10 minutes from now, the scheduled task will kick off and do a GP update with whichever switch you give it. So for example, if I do invoke GP update, let's see, computer DSC test, and just do that. DSC test is not responding. Okay. I might have a firewall set up on that. But essentially that's the let me try another machine that I have and see if that works. Okay, so that worked. So if I were to go over to DSC pull and went into this task scheduler, I would see a scheduled task for that GP update. If I wanted to do a force, I could just do like that, and it would do it with a force. Just so you know it's there, this is also in GPMC. So group policy update. This is another function of Windows 8/2012 R2. So I can do let me find an OU that actually has some servers in it. I can do a group policy update. It will detect all the computers. It will automatically do a GP update force. There's no options for switches, and it will go ahead and do that. Now, the PowerShell commandlet doesn't support feeding in an OU, but you could obviously use something like get AD computer.
Filter star.
What's that?
Filter star.
Thank you. Filter star and get a list of the computers. And I don't know if this will work if I just pipe it to invoke GP update. So let's see what happens.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Let's see. Nope. I noticed that the.
No, it did work. It just didn't work because your machines are off.
Oh, right. Is that true? Let me see. At least one of them should have worked. So I'm not entirely sure now that I look at it. This machine should have worked, and it didn't. So,
This is a
yeah.
demonstration of Wirecast.
It might take some extra. I've noticed that the group policy commandlets don't universally behave well on the pipeline. So,
Select dash object name and then pipe it.
what's that?
Select dash object and then
Yeah.
name and then pipe.
That's probably right. Something like this. Select name, pipe, invoke, GP update. No. All right. I'm going to have to spend some time with that one. You know, what I've done before, because I tend to be a hack when it comes to this stuff, is I'll get the list of computers, store it in a variable, and for each through it.
I for each everything.
Yeah, it just works. You know, and I admit, you know, I don't spend enough time with PowerShell. I love PowerShell. I don't spend enough time with it to be like I'm on the PowerShell MVP mailing list, because I like to watch really smart PowerShell people talk about cool stuff. And, you know, sometimes my head spins when I'm reading the threads. But in any case, it is possible to do that with the right collection of commandlets and for each loops. And you could, you know, do basically what the GUI does to feed it the list of OUs. I'm going to have to get that working so I can actually look like I know what I'm talking about. Okay. Let me go back to my presentation. Okay. I wanted to show this. This is like a sample of something that's going to be available soon. It's an abomination. We are implementing a free MMC/client-side extension to be able to deliver desired state configuration documents via group policy. I have no idea if anyone cares about this, but we've developed it and are going to put it out there. So this is kind of the sort of intersection of unholiness where desired state configuration and group policy meet. So you'll be able to use group policy essentially as a targeting and delivery vehicle for desired state configuration documents. And it's very basic in the first release. We'll support one document for a given target. You'll be able to put in some custom resources if you have them. And after we're done with that, we'll see where it goes. But I did want to mention that if you go out to our site by the time Ignite happens, if you go out to our site and you're interested in playing around with this, it'll be out on the freeware page. And I think that might be it. Just a little bit about us. This is what we do. And thank you. Appreciate it. Question?
Sort of unrelated to the PowerShell aspect of it, but some GPOs that you apply only take effect on system reboot.
Some GPOs only take effect on reboot. That's correct.
Is there any tips that you can advise to detect those in advance so we can kind of predict that's going to happen?
Yeah, so the question is, are there any tips that can detect those in advance? So I will say that there's two classes of those. There are client-side extensions that absolutely positively always run in the foreground, or only run in the foreground. They include folder redirection, software installation, GP preferences, drive mappings before Windows 8.1, and Microsoft Disk Quota, if anyone actually uses that. All of those only run in the foreground. So they only run on a reboot, or they only run on a relog on. So that if you're using one of those 4 policy areas, there's no way around that. In Windows 8.1, Microsoft made, some of you may not know this, but they made GP preferences drive mappings run in the background. So you can actually add and remove drive mappings now in GP preferences without the user logging off and logging back on. The only downside is there anyone that's actually deployed Windows 8.1?
Yeah.
Probably not. So now there are other settings that require a reboot to take effect. Those are much harder to know definitively, because what ends up happening is they could be admin template settings, they could be security settings. It's all a function of the component they're controlling and how that was written. So some of those components will simply not read the policy setting again until the system reinitializes it. Maybe for stability reasons, or just because that's the way it was coded. I don't have a list of those because it's kind of like completely all over the place. You know, I've come across those myself from time to time. You know, I can't even think of any off the top of my head. And it's really, there's no way, unless it's documented in like the explain text, that's really the only way you'll ever know for sure, unless you just test it. So I wish I had a better answer there, but I don't. Oh yeah, and Eric asked me to mention that on 4/30, that's the end of this month, Jeffrey Snover will be here, father of PowerShell. So that will be a must-see event if any of you guys are interested in seeing that. Jeffrey's an awesome speaker. And any other questions? Yeah, Janelle.
That's not really your Twitter handle, is it?
What's that?
That's not really your Twitter handle, is
It isn't.
it?
Thank you. I hate when that happens. In fact, that's the Twitter handle for NetIQ.
Yeah.
I've done that myself a couple times. I actually used that instead of the hashtag. And so it really kind of irritated me. So that's my Twitter handle. Thank you very much. NetIQ might have just gotten a bunch of followers. Yeah, so any other group policy, PowerShell and group policy unholy questions? Okay, cool. Well, thanks very much. I appreciate it. I guess I should ask if there's any questions on the Hangout, but I don't see any, so I'll say no.
In fact, Darren, I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Thank you very much.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Very good. All right, Darren, I'm going to hang up. Thanks a bunch, man.
Thanks, Eric.
Take care.
Thanks, Darren.
You bet. How you been?
Pretty good.
Good. Yes, that is mine. Thank you. What's that? I am going to tonight. I can't. I'm paying as an individual this time. I'm not. I am speaking, but I'm only speaking because somebody invited me to speak with them.
Can you give me your speaker badge?
I'm not even getting a speaker badge.
No! So let me, what time are we at?
7:45.
Let's just change the guard here for a second. Is there more pizza? Not really.
Can I unplug you?
2 drinks if you want to race. I think I see a flaw with this t-shirt. All right. I don't like this. You still moving out?
I am.
Anyone going to Ignite? Build? Build going once? Nobody, huh? Wrong crowd for build.
If
Are
they
you
had
going?
given us more than like 40 minutes to register before.
Yeah, I
it's
know. Solid fill.
Administration of Wirecast.
Janelle, you don't have anything, do you?
We have my department is putting on a after build, but it's really the first after hours at build event for anybody who is interested in build announcements and some stuff around .NET and what's coming out of build without actually attending build. There is a community party that we're doing on the night of the 29th. If you're interested in that, you can find out about, you can find the link for it on my blog, techmoney.com. I have it posted there. And it's also in the Microsoft Silicon Valley events meetup. There's a link about it. So if anybody's interested in that, it's probably easier to go to my blog. It's easier to remember techmoney.com than to find the right stuff. So there's a link there for that. But it's a community event. You don't have to have a bill ticket to come to that event, and you'll get to hear a good chunk of what's happening in building. That's my only announcement.
Yeah.
Oh, Doug?
Yes.
Are you changing the meeting date because of Ignite?
You're asking me to think into the future.
Yes, because I can tell you right now, the week before, the room's probably booked. Matter of fact, I know the room's booked because we're using it for the
So are all the rooms booked? Or are these the rooms?
These are the only rooms we have in this meeting.
Okay. And I haven't looked around. Is Sam here? Sam's not here, is he? From CCS? Okay. Okay. So let me ask you this. Last year, we had Nathan Ide come down. He was presenting at RSA conference. And just to give you an idea, Nathan Ide works with Mark Rusinovich fairly closely. And he gave a presentation that was called Pass the Hash Attack, or the PTH. And if I remember right, that was one Tuesday evening that was storming, right? Pouring rain, so I think most people didn't show up. But I'll tell you, Nathan wrote to me about a month ago and he said, Doug, your group is better than presenting at the RSA conference, so can we do it? So are you interested? Yeah, okay. So if we can't use this facility, CCSF has a Chinatown campus, and we can use that auditorium for free, which is where we were last year. So it's across. I'm not that up to date with this part of San Francisco, but isn't the campus like a couple blocks?
Yeah. 2 blocks after.
Yeah. So 2 blocks away from here. So big deal. If we can't use here, we'll go down there. Does that sound okay? Yeah. I got to think about this. Has Microsoft talked about new authentication in Windows 10?
Microsoft hasn't talked about anything.
Oh, okay. Have you talked about the partnership with?
Well, they have. They did. The tech day.
Yeah, they did.
Europe, they did. We talked about the Hello service.
The Hello in the, it's not Adobe, who is it? The single sign-on?
What week's RSA?
2 weeks from today? Or 2 weeks from yesterday?
Okay. So you want to do what? Evening thing that week?
Yeah.
Looks like the 21st is open right now.
What day is that?
That's Tuesday.
Oh, are you here?
Of Wirecast.
Oh, no, Nathan can host, right?
He's a Microsoft employee.
Yes?
Yes, he can host himself. He has to.
Okay.
But it looks like the Monday and the Tuesday, this room is available. The Wednesday is not.
Okay, so Monday is B-sides. Sunday, Monday is B-sides.
So Tuesday is the 21st.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar, there's an anti-RSA conference that started a couple of years ago. It's called B-Sides SF. So you can try and register. They're asking for a 20, what? Yeah, I know.
Wirecast.
So I believe that they have additional tickets that they're going to release. And they're asking for a $20 donation that's going to EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation. So give them the $20 or give them more.
what can I say? Janelle, do you have anything else?
No, that's it.
No, so I think we won't do a May meeting. Well, you won't be here, so it solves that.
I don't know who's gonna run the meeting.
Yeah, so we'll keep you posted. The other thing I need to talk about is registration. So the security guards are doing their job downstairs, which means they're turning you away. They turned people away tonight. So you got to make sure to register by, let's say, Sunday night. Is that fair enough?
Only if you send the email before then.
I sent the email a week in advance.
Yeah, you sent 2 emails.
Yeah, thank you. You're on my team.
Your website says noon, by the way.
What?
Your website says noon.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Just a heads up.
What website? Pull up the website.
That's the old office, then it says noon on Tuesday. You need to change it. You need to say 9 a.m. Monday.
Can you bring it up? Okay. Somebody tell.
What do you want? The website?
All right, yeah, bring it up.
If I open this, it's going to be your email or something.
Just cover the pictures of the naked girls. As if I have time.
This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
So where does it say noon?
When you go to the RSVP,
But if you go to
it sounds like RSVP.
Oh, click on RSVP. Shows you how often I go to this website.
Please register by noon the day before the meeting.
Oh.
Monday. And noon, you might make it, but it really should be like 10 a.m.
So what do you want to do?
Sunday.
Sunday?
Sunday night would be best, because then either you or I can get the registration list to Jackie by Monday morning.
Okay.
You do need to update on the left index. You have a special link that goes to SF meeting location. You still have the old address, by the way, on your site.
Crazy website stuff. Why doesn't it know we changed? I changed it one place.
Wait, Doug,
Yeah.
who would like to be responsible for updating the website?
Yeah, that was the answer I got 20 years ago.
You know, it's just like, it takes a village, people. So who would like to, take that, you got your side.
You're willing to do it?
it?
So I will tell you, the woman, we had a volunteer that did this way back, and I bribed him every once in a while with hardware or stuff I got from Fry's. I paid for it, so it wasn't like giving away money, because I felt kind of guilty giving somebody money when I know they did a lot of work, and the money nowhere near compensated for the work that they did. So I felt hardware was kind of a better gesture. That's my mind. And then things started to get a little bit more sophisticated. So we have a woman by the name of Cami who's been doing the website, and she runs a company out of Sacramento. We're up in that area. What's below Sacramento? Elk Grove, I think is where she is. It's called Why Not Web, W-N-O-T. No, Y. What am I thinking? Y-N-O-T Web. So she's been doing it, but her mother just passed away. So she's a little busy right now. She's out of state, so if you want to pitch in, that would be great. I've got a lot of stuff going on personally, just work and school. So what I got is I wanted to show a real quick presentation. I threw this together.
I'm just putzing with stuff.
Okay, I need somehow, okay. Do you have a clicker? I feel better with a clicker.
Just see the pale gray text on the bright.
Yeah. What? Hey, Darren, are you leaving or can I use your clicker? Can I use your clicker or are you running out?
I'm gonna get out.
Yeah, okay.
Hold on, wait a second.
Okay, we'll find a clicker.
Janelle.
I forgot mine. So I'll tell you, I don't know if I should do this. I'm not trying to brag.
There you go.
But I need the,
It's in the back.
oh, got it. So a couple years ago, I asked if anybody was interested in studying for the CISSP, that nice exam. So a couple people were, and I started studying, and then I kind of led a study group, and I helped people along, and then I never took the exam. So a couple years later, which is now, I took the exam today. 6 hours later, I hope I passed. No, I did pass. So it was kind of interesting. So I was in Oakland. I got to tell you that Pearson VUE testing centers, boy, have they changed. If you haven't taken an exam, I mean, they have offices nicer than this.
You should check out Redwood City. They have a facility in Redwood City on the.
Well, they have one in Oakland. They probably have a nice view, right?
Beautiful. It's the marina.
And can you look out the window?
Depends which classroom you have.
Yeah. So I was actually surprised. I'm sharing this with you. There's a test center in San Francisco. There's one right downtown Oakland at 12th Street BART. It's like 20 feet away, or it's across the street from the BART station. There's one in Vacaville. There's one in, what are we saying? Redwood Shores. There's one in Daly City. That's the one I'm missing. And there's someplace down San Jose, and I think you got to go to Reno for the next one. But they had, I couldn't believe it, they had like 25 testing machines. And then they had the other half, which was another 25. And then they had, or at least that's what I'm guessing, I couldn't see. And then they have these kind of isolated rooms. Well, I don't know what tests they give in those. Those are for the really crazy people, I guess. But it was a 6-hour exam. I studied like crazy over the past week and a half. And I wasn't sure if I passed. And the first question, I thought, I blew it. Do you have anything? Or?
I just wanted to say that if anyone wants the slides, because a couple people came up to me afterwards that I presented, just Darren, Darren @scmsoftware.com.
Okay, it doesn't work.
A note, and I'll send you the slides.
Oh.
I just wanted to mention that. Thank you. Yeah.
Janelle, how do you make it go?
Could you write your email address up on the whiteboard?
I can wipe. Yes, I can. That's so much easier. I'll do it on both sides so people don't have to like.
Up?
Yes. And then it'll show you that it's on.
Oh, maybe it's the other side. Got it. And it vibrates.
It does. And it's got a filter. It's very handy.
Why does it vibrate?
It's always in the gutter. Can you read that? So, Darren, do you have anything else? Sorry.
I don't. Sorry, I didn't want to read
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Why does it vibrate?
Don't ask. Is this the girls' model? There's a boys' model? We won't go there.
Oh, you said don't ask.
But I tell. Okay. I'm not going to take too much time. I don't know what else we have to talk about. But for the past, 2-3 years, I've been begging you for routers and stuff, right, to give me. And what I thought I'd do is I'd kind of share, because I'm now teaching at City College San Francisco with Sam Bone. Most of you know Sam. So I'm trying to, with Sam, create a pretty good program out there. I'm at the Ocean Street campus, which is Balboa BART, okay? So some of my students are here, and some of STEM students might be here too. So how do you go forward? What? Oh, you're one of those. Okay. So what I thought I'd do is I put together a little presentation. This is what my students and I have built over at CCSF. So thanks to you guys, I've been driving all over the Bay Area. I've collected over 150 retired computers. Translation, your junk is working out great for us, right? So this is kind of half the pile that's there. This is over at Ocean Campus. And then I've got somebody that donated close to, collectively about 200 monitors. So thank you for doing all that. The stuff I can't use, although I know some companies have a problem with this, I give away to students. So if they can't afford a computer, I usually ask like $10, $20, because I'm paying for gas or the parking ticket or something. You know what I mean, if you pick up stuff in San Francisco, right? So I picked up all this stuff. So I've got 200 of them. I'm going to skip through this. This is a classroom. So first thing we did, sorry about the quality of the picture, but you can see that if you look up above, there's a ledge. But with the monitors, everybody now has dual screen or dual monitors. So thank you very much for doing that. My students really appreciate that. That way, while they're doing their labs, they can watch the baseball game or basketball game. You know, and it's a good thing. because I believe we have a T3 going out to the internet, so it works out great for everybody. But the dual displays work out, I gotta tell you, really, really well in an education environment. More stuff. So this last semester, I finally reached in my pocket because I got so frustrated. You know how broken our education system is? It's broken beyond belief. But I went to Costco and I brought the racks that you see. If you've gone to Costco, I've been asking for a year for the racks, and finally I said, screw it, because we had a stack of about, 30, 20 computers that were kind of the leaning tower of computers. And so I was afraid that one day somebody'd jiggle one, the whole thing would topple over. So I said, screw it. So if you take a look here, you'll see that I have all these chrome racks. We put them, they're on wheels so we can wheel them around. Students now, instead of working in a virtual environment, are actually getting physical. You know, they're touching this stuff. And the one thing I'm realizing is, like, none of them have any experience with cable management, right? I mean, how do you do that virtually, right? You know, and I'll get to something else here, but I bought 2 of these racks. I bought a whole slew of stuff, but I bought 2 of these racks. I split them, so I have essentially 4 stations, and I can put, sorry you can't see this at the other side, but, or maybe I could, well, who cares? But if you take a look at the top, I made like a little work surface so I can have 2 to 3 students working at each bank of computers. So if you do the math on this real quickly, think about this for a second. If you have 2 amps per computer, and let's say you have 60 computers, how many amps you need? 120. And I'm thinking, Sam's telling me already, if you take a look at these machines, the ones that are already in there, he tells me when they image the computers, they blow the breakers. So what he tells me he has to do is run around and turn off all the monitors. Now I just added to his problem because now we have 2 monitors. So, you know, I made this a lot worse. So I was sitting in Sam's office one day, and, you know, CCSF has been around since 1930. Well, some 35, somewhere in there. This building isn't quite that old, but I found, I'll give you kind of a long story. There was a neighbor of mine that was remodeling their house, and they threw out their watt meter, you know, from PG&E. So I grabbed it, and I thought, one day, you know how this works, right? One day I'll have a use for this. So sure enough, down the hall, they were throwing out kind of like this coat closet thing. And I thought, this is great. It gives me a wall so I can start putting stuff on there. So I went there, and they gave me the whole housing for the watt meter. So now I've got that mounted. I went to Home Depot. I bought a circuit breaker. And I thought, you know, well, let me get to that in a second. I don't know if I can put that picture in there. No, okay. So I was in Sam's office, and I'm looking, and there was a 220 outlet for a range. And I thought, you know, what? Why would there be a 220 outlet in somebody's office? And I'm thinking a heater, a kiln. Why would they put that at school? And then somebody told me, that's because this was the teacher's break room and there used to be a stove in there. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. Now I got 220, but the circuit couldn't be live after 30 years or 20 years of removing the stove, could it? Yeah, I could. So I went in there with a voltmeter. Sure enough, it's 220. So I take my 220, I went to Lowe's, and I spent about $75, $100 on an extension cord that now goes into Sam's office, which is just kind of, it's about 30 feet. So it's number 10 wire. You see where this is going, right? This worked out great. So I take the number 10 wire, which is on the left side, it goes up into the watt meter, and then comes down, feeds just like at your home, the circuit breaker panel. I've got, if you look down below, there are 2 110 outlets, and then I've got a 220. So now I'm running all the servers at 220 volt. So this is a real lesson for my students. I tell them, don't plug stuff into the 220 unless you know it's for 220. I don't know if I took any pictures, but the breaker's in the center for 220. And I gotta tell you, this has worked out to be a really good lesson for all my students. So now I've got, do the math on this, 30 amp at 220, which would be 60 amp. right at 120. You do it right.
110.
What?
At 110, you got it.
Yeah, or 110. Did I do that right? But you understand the math. Okay, so now I'm teaching my students electricity and wire size and all this stuff. Pretty good, huh?
I'm sure you got that all completely covered by like the permitting.
It's temporary.
It's right behind the work order for the guys at the facilities to turn the breaker off for the 220 when the stove got removed.
And the monitor right in front, that means there's a clear path right up to that breaker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an extension cord. Let me continue. So then, thanks to the city of Los Gatos, I drove down there. These guys gave me a tape drive, but it's a changer, so it's a 16 tape drive. And I hope nobody's here from the city of Los Gatos because they gave me 6 tapes. So I'm curious to see what's on them. Oh, we shouldn't talk about that. But I mean, this was a real nice gift from them. So I'm trying to figure out if I can use it. So then there was an initiative from the National Science Foundation a couple years back that they wanted us to teach green energy is what they were calling it. So there's a company that's based out of Colorado that's called Watts Up, WATTSUP. Yeah, joke. But I gotta tell you, these things are great. They're about $200. And what they do is they are a recording watt meter, which means that they record, energy usage. So if you're thinking about going solar with solar panels on your roof, get one of these things first. And you can measure exactly how much devices are costing you to operate. So the reason that I got 2 is why? I'm plugging servers in because servers have dual power supply. So it's interesting, I've talked to some of my teachers that were teaching green energy, and I asked them, I said, when you have dual power supplies running, does one carry the full load and the other one just stand by ready to kick in? Or are they both drawing half? And what do you think an instructor would say at a 4-year university? Prestigious what? The wrong answer. And then I got to tell you, this guy's part of this National Science Foundation grant too. But my guess was that each power supply was supplying 50% of the load, which would make sense. And if one power supply failed, then the other one would just ramp up. Does that make sense? So now I've got these watt meters and I can prove it. And where I'm trying to go with this is we're trying to calculate, by using the watt meter, we know exactly how much energy we're getting through that extension cord, and we can translate that to money, what PG&E charges us. So I thought that's a pretty good exercise. These things take it one step further. They sample the current or the wattage draw on the order, I forgot, but something like 100 or 1,000 times a second, and then they average it. So it plots it out second by second by second. The one on the left is a .NET model. It has an RJ45 cable, so you can plug this into the internet and you can watch in real time. There's a website, and I've kind of forgotten how to do this because it's been a while since I've had these. The one on the right has a USB port, so does the .NET one. You can download, you dump into Excel, and then you can plot this stuff. You can see energy usage over time. So pretty nice, huh? Let me see if I put anything else in here. No. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is to show you that where your donations are going and how you're helping me out, and Sam out, and CCSF. And you got any stuff? No, I'm always looking for more stuff because I don't know where this goes. And I'm sure if you started out in your tech career, the best place to learn this stuff is by doing, right? Jeremy, what do you got? 25 computers in your garage you want me to pick up?
I got 15 computers, I got servers, I got stuff.
What, I guess I didn't put in. So the other thing I've got in here are racks, and I'm looking for a couple more server racks. And I'm looking for either Dell or HP. I can be picky now. But I've got some rack-mounted servers in here. And if you take a look in the lower right-hand corner, I've got 2 HP servers.
You want an enclosure?
Maybe. You know, I'm also running out of real estate. No, I know, we'll talk. So I'm looking for networking gear, routers, switches, hubs, specifically gig. I'm looking for switches that are gig. No, I'm requesting.
Oh, you're not asking for 10 gig.
Oh, okay. Anybody for one? You know, I just got an invitation to go to the Ethernet conference, and they're talking about 500 gig Ethernet. Have you heard that?
They're going faster than that.
Really? Yeah, I mean, I was looking, it was like, wait a minute, how many zeros are there? Because we went to 10 gig, there are 100 gig, 200 gig, 400 gig. Is there 600?
I think they're even double that, actually.
Okay, I can't do the math in my head. Anyway.
You want to be 2U Cisco router?
You know, you're junk.
It isn't even that old.
No, listen. Your stuff will wind up in a landfill, right? Or go back. What? I got to tell you this before we do this. Have you seen the Vice video? If you watch Vice, it's on YouTube, of where our stuff is going, the world's supply of recyclables. Yeah. So it's going to Ghana, and it's going to a dump site where all the kids take it, they light it on fire, they burn it to burn away all the plastic. That's our, $25 recycling fee for all the monitors. So we're keeping America clean. But it turns out Australia, Europe is all sending the same stuff all to Ghana. They burn it and the kids get maybe $1 or $2 for the copper wire.
And cancer.
Oh yeah.
That's a little free.
Yeah, a little bonus, right? So I think somebody told me there's a company in South San Francisco, Green Energy, Green Recyclers. So not only do you pay your $25 when you buy the monitor, but you can pay them $35 to recycle it, which they're already supposed to be doing, and I'm not making fun of them, but you pay an additional fee and they guarantee not to send it to Ghana.
Or you sell it online.
Or you sell it online and then it goes to Ghana.
Or they sell it in a developing country where
they'll actually use it.
Buy an i7, a new machine.
Look, I got to tell you, it's really sad. I will tell you, go out and look Vice Video, Ghana, or internet scamming in Ghana. So I don't know what it's called. But you'll see where they're the dump site. And actually, one of my professors, fellow colleagues, took a sabbatical and went to Africa, and she went out of her way to go there. And she said, yep, I've been there. That's exactly what they're doing. They have cargo containers just coming in by the boatload. And they just come along, they hook up, they dump it into this big open pit. I don't know how big it is, but you look at the picture and it's just all the plastic and all the crud that, we're recycling. And I guess we are, roundabout way. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you and just say thank you for everybody that's donated stuff, from your little home router, Linksys stuff, all the way up to these computers, tape drives. Yes, sir.
Since you have a lot of routers, can your circuit breaker handle stuff for Bitcoin mining?
Maybe.
Some money on the side.
Look, we're not paying for the electricity.
Wait. We're paying you electricity.
Yeah, you were paying. The taxpayers are.
Anyway,
that's
run
what.
out to your Tesla too, don't you?
What?
You got a 220 run out to your Tesla too, don't you? It's out Sam's window and into the parking lot.
I should share. I went to part of this green energy stuff. I got sent to some workshops on solar panels. And I should show you some of the presentation. I won't do this tonight. But if you remind me, it's interesting because Foothill College, and my statistics might be off a little bit, but they put solar panels, as did DVC, over the entire parking lot. And they have something like 10,000 parking places that are covered. And I might be off on the numbers. I've forgotten. But the interesting fact was that they have, I think, 4 parking places for electric vehicles. And they said if one car comes in that needs a full charge, no problem. 2 cars come in, we have no problem. 3 cars come in, then we have to buy our electricity from PG&E. So out of the 10,000 parking places that are covered, it's 5,000 solar, panels covering 5,000 parking places. If I remember right, charges one car.
Which normally would pay for the power for the school.
Sorry, which is normally paying for the cost. Yeah, it's something on that order. So that's why, I kind of got interested in the watt meter and these watts up. And by the way, I didn't put a picture of this. If you go online to eBay, you'll find that they're, out of China, and I've ordered a couple of these, they haven't come in yet. But they have these, they don't have recording, but they have 4 LED panel displays. One of them shows amperage, one shows voltage, one shows kilowatts, one shows kilowatt hours. And so I've got a couple of those coming in, I'll show you, and that way you can see in real time what the current or what the wattage usage is, and then you can calculate. It doesn't have any way of dumping to a spreadsheet or any way where you can look at it online, but they're $10. Versus these are around 200.
What was your answer on the dual power supplies?
So the dual power supply it's 50% coming from each one, which is what you would expect, right?
Keep warm.
Well, yeah. So I mean, if you think about it, if you had to go from 0 to 60, right, versus it kind of from an engineering point doesn't make sense. All right, that's all I have for tonight. Thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed tonight's meeting, and look for your email. We'll tell you about Pass the Hash and whatever else we're doing. You're welcome. You done? I guess so, huh?
Word on the street if you got a link to that presentation that they did somewhere, right? So...
Do you know anybody?
Oh, yeah, no worries. Hold on just a second.
No.
Let me end.
Why, do you?
No. Oh. I'm interviewing there though in 2 weeks, so.
Oh, good for you.
Might as well, right?
You gonna make it rain?
I don't care about the rain.